Hi class, I just wanted to highlight certain sections of this particular chapter on adapting to differences in your textbook. You will go through the textbook, listen to the audio, or you can read, but perhaps you want to listen to the audio and take notes, and then you will have an assessment. We'll be asking you certain questions regarding particular areas of the chapter. Now, in this particular very short PowerPoint where I'm highlighting certain areas, I want you to explore more into each of these sections. So first, I want you to definitely look at adapting to social style differences in the workplace. Here we're looking at the combination of two primary dimensions. Basically, this is assertiveness and responsiveness. Dimensions, meaning, a social style is a pattern of communication behaviors that you may have. So are you very assertive? You actively make requests? You actively discuss? Or are you more of a responsiveness type person where you're sensitive to the whole communication that's taking place, whether it's in a meeting or with other people? You're a good listener. Your book explores more in each of these dimensions. Also, I'd like you to be aware of the 4 quadrants of social style. So social style is your communication behavior in the workplace, but there's 4 quadrants that your book looks at. Yes, the 4 quadrants are amiable, analytical, driver, or expressive. So the first one has to do with comforting. And usually someone who's in this area, it would be maybe a teacher. Another area would be analytical. As we know, that would be more of a critical thinker. An engineer, perhaps, would fall into this category. A driver, that type of quadrant of social style, your communication skills, your communication behavior is pushy. That would maybe be a small business owner. And the last is expressive, and that's where you're considered very competent. There's more adjectives that describe each of these areas. Expressive would be a salesperson, perhaps. So identify social style. Think about where you fall. Are you, first of all, in the primary dimension, are you assertive or are you more responsive? And then in the 4 quadrants of social style, where do you fall in the quadrants? Now you'll see in your textbook and in your reading that depending on where you fall in your quadrants, you may be very strong in being responsive, but not so strong in assertiveness as far as a dimension of social style. So this is a reflective type of chapter, but also makes you look and think about differences in how people approach communication, as well as culture and as well as gender. We're going to also look at, and I want you to focus on adapting to social style differences. And I made some notes here. Defining style flexing. And here you want to adapt your communication to how others communicate. And then guidelines to style flex. Here you are looking at, in a sense, of where do you fall in your style of communication, and then how can you adapt that to others based on your style as you're communicating with one another. Cultural differences. So we're looking at style. Next, I really want you to focus on Hofstede's dimensions of culture. First, we're looking at cultural context, and you'll see that I added a YouTube video on this. High context cultures and low context cultures. What do these mean? Where do we live? Basically, low context culture is direct meaning. We speak what we want to say to another person. There's not a lot of external context that in a sense interferes with the communication. High context cultures would be more of a country or nation such as Asia or a Middle Eastern country, where you have to read a lot of the nonverbal communication to understand the communication that's taking place. This is where there's a lot of customs that may be known by folks in a high context culture, and you know you're supposed to say something or do something based on these customs. So high context, meaning there's a lot of context coming in. Low, there's not a lot of context, a lot of different settings. The YouTube video really explains it well, and you can see you don't have to be polarized as far as high and low. You could be somewhere in the middle, depending on your culture, but it's good to be aware of these different types of cultures and communication. Also, along with the cultural differences, we're looking at Hofstede's dimensions of culture, and we're looking at individualism versus collectivism. Perhaps you've heard this term before. Again, I have a YouTube video on this for you, and what this tells you is how does somebody interact in their society? Are they more of an individualist, where you are concerned with yourself, maybe your immediate family, compared to a collective culture where you're looking at the whole community as a whole, and you do well, or you do things for the community, not necessarily just for yourself or for your immediate family. Second value looks at power in a culture, within a nation. Is it decentralized or centralized? In a culture, and you'll read this and you'll listen to this about, different cultures that have acceptance of uncertainty versus preference for certainty. Some cultures like that certainty, very traditional, compared to other cultures that are not so, they don't have that preference, so they have more of an acceptance of uncertainty. Short-term versus long-term orientation, and that has to do with time. And then lastly, is the culture more of a masculine type value of a culture, or is it more of a feminine type culture? So you'll look at some different countries that fall into each of these categories and how this plays in a particular culture. How do we adapt? Obviously, we need to be positive. We need to be aware of these different cultural differences. You'll review on the way to adapt and guidelines for effective communication. The next section is on gender differences. Yes, do we speak differently and listen differently based on masculine type of communication compared to feminine type of communication? Feminine type of communication listens and communicates more for detail, more for the relationship, where masculine style communicates more for fact-finding bottom liners. So in the chapter, you will see how this all plays in to the workplace as far as adapting to gender differences. The key here is to be aware, yes, we do have gender differences. You don't necessarily have to be female to have feminine style of communication or male to have masculine style of communication. But we do have different styles of communication in the sense of a gender specification and how we communicate based on that gender specification. You'll look at how you adapt, how to be flexible, and guidelines to follow. One looks at rapport with rapport versus report, one being masculine, one being feminine. So those are the top items I want you to focus on in this chapter. Obviously, I do want you to review and listen and read regarding the other areas, especially about generational communication within the workplace. Where do you fall in a generation and how you communicate based on that particular generation. You'll see that along with listening to the chapter, you'll have an assessment that goes along with this, where I will be asking you to focus on a certain area of this particular chapter by answering questions regarding these particular areas. I do want you to think of yourself as you are reading and learning about these areas, these styles and cultural differences and gender differences and generational differences. Think of yourself where you work. If you have a career or a job at this time, and how you interact with others who may have differences, and also think about your style, social style, as far as whether you are assertive or you're more responsive, or does it depend on the situation, depend on the meeting, depend on the environment with whom you are with. Okay, have a good chapter, and I look forward to reading your responses.